The following lecture is for Chapter 3 of Urban Land Use Planning. It's entitled What Makes a Good Plan? My name is Scott Reimers, and the class is URP 3350, Plan Making, History, and Future. So before we dive into Chapter 3, let's review quickly Chapter 2. In Chapter 2, we talked about how land use planning can be so difficult because of the tensions that are in the land use arena. And it's kind of like a drum. It only works well when there is a tightness and a tension to that drum. Similarly, in a land use plan, if you don't see tension as you're creating that plan, often you're probably not doing enough outreach. You're not thinking critically enough about some of the issues. Because of that tension, we need that process to be dynamic. It needs to be ready to change at any moment. And we need to recognize that we're not trying to create a utopia so much as trying to create a process that is thorough and addresses all of those tensions. And part of that, we talked about what we used to call the stool of sustainability, in which there was a three-legged stool, and it incorporated those three E's of economy, equity, and the environment. And we talked about how in each of those, in that triangle or in that stool, there were issues around property conflicts and resource conflicts and development conflicts. And then we recognized that there was a need for that stool or that triangle to also address the issue of livability. And so that stool became, or that triangle became two-dimensional, and then by adding livability, it became three-dimensional, and we created what's now called the prism model. And that's what the authors move forward. In that prism model, we talked about the additional conflicts as well. And then at the end of that lecture, we talked about what are some of the different practices we can use in order to get to that heart of the sustainability prism. We talked about rational planning, and that's kind of that 1950s process of looking at data, analyzing it, coming up with reasonable solutions, testing those solutions or plans, and then choosing a plan that works for the community. That's saying that it's a 1950s process doesn't mean that we don't use that process today. We still use it, but we tend to use it in conjunction with a census building approach, which really came about in the 1990s, where we really strove to bring as many people into the plan making process as possible. And then we're also pulling in, a good plan will pull in an urban design approach so that it's addressing good urban design. So before we can talk about what a good quality plan looks like, we need to address what is the purpose of the plan. As the authors in Chapter 3 start talking about this concept, what they're really referring to and what we would in California call a comprehensive general plan. They also use the term master plan, but that kind of has a different connotation in California. We call it a comprehensive general plan. A general plan, as the author suggests, and as the state of California would say, is a document that's looking 20 to 30 years out. Now, it's important to note that per the general plan guidelines that the Office of Planning and Research puts out, it says that should be updated approximately every 10 years. But that end state that you're looking forward to in the general plan is about 20 or 30 years out. That's the horizon line. And a general plan or a plan should look at what are the legal implications around growth, what are the political implications either in your local jurisdiction and statewide, and what logical issues need to be dealt with. So the goal is to create or manage development so that it addresses each of those sections, and then creates a settlement pattern for how a city should settle in the future. So as the authors continue to talk about the purpose of a plan, they suggest that the plan has four key aspects that it needs to move forward. One is that it sets a vision, and typically this is how your general plan process will begin, by asking the people in your community to create a vision for the community. What is that future end state? Not how do you get there, but what is that end goal that you're looking to? And then you typically prepare that in a set of words to create a vision statement. That might also then be translated into pictures, but that vision statement is written out in Word. It's important to also begin with a good set of facts, and that the general plan, you typically, early on in the process, you would prepare a technical document that talks about all the different facts that describe your community. And then that moves you, both the set of facts and the vision, moves you through a set of goals. And then each goal will have a set of policies. And the goal is a broad picture of the end state that you're looking forward to getting to. And then the policies tell you how to get there. Good policies tend to include numbers, and they talk about who, what, where, why, and how. Another good plan, the purpose of the plan is to take short-term thinking that a city council or planning commission or community might have and compare it to those long-range goals that have been set up by that community. And so it helps take these short-term problems, like should this house be 2 stories or 1 story or 3 stories, and then it pits it against some of those broader ideas that might be in your general plan about social equity and ecology and the economy and how to create a livable community. It's also important that a plan is relevant to what's happening in terms of trends in a community, and also it needs to be relevant to what's happening in the region. Is the region growing by use of light rail transit? If so, how is your community going to connect with that? Is the region going through a region-wide sort of open space planning program? And if so, how does your community connect to that open space? Things like that. So how do you know whether you have a high quality plan? Some ways of knowing is that it's helping inform a debate. So when a community is debating whether certain action should be taken, they will turn to your general plan and they will highlight what are the goals of that plan. Does this fit in with the vision that we developed as a community? It will also document. Remember, we talked early on in chapter 1 that the land use process is much like a game where there's certain actors all following a set of rules to come to a conclusion. Your general plan will document that debate and the points of agreement within that community. And then your reference document will ensure that goals are not overlooked for short-term gain. So I kind of talked about that in the last slide, but when you're making short-term decisions, people will turn back to this document to make sure that it also takes into account the long-term vision. So now we're going to kind of change gears. We've talked about the purpose of a plan, and from now we're going to change gears to what are the different types of plans that you might be preparing. This image here shows that you have an area-wide land use plan, which is very general, and then from there you move down to a community-wide land use design plan. That's what we might call in California a general plan. Then you have specific plans, and then you have a development management plan. The only one of these that's required by the state of California is that community-wide land use design plan or a general plan. Now notice that these move from general to the specific. State law would also say that they need to be integrated. Each of these documents need to reflect the goals and policies of the documents below them and above them, that there needs to be consistency between each of these documents. And they're interdependent one on the other. So the goals of the area-wide land use plan are going to be reliant on the work that's done in all of the other plans below it to make sure that those goals come to fruition. So now that we've kind of gone over the idea that's linking each of these 4 different types of plans, let's go and talk about each of them one at a time. Firstly, you have the area-wide land use policy plan. And this is a document that looks at what land is suitable for development, how much demand is there, or what demand is there, and for what type of development. Is there more demand for agriculture? Is there more demand for rural growth or urban growth? Is there a large demand to preserve or conserve areas? So that's kind of that area-wide land use plan, looking at those bigger issues. And then these documents tend to just categorize land into 3 areas: conservation areas, rural areas, and urban areas. So your document then would then create a set of policies for each of those different districts. If you think about it, what type of cities might have these 3 different types: conservation areas, rural areas, and urban areas? In Southern California, these would probably be areas out in the desert. They might be areas up in Ventura County or the Central Valley, where you have areas moving from conservation to agriculture or agriculture to urban areas. Not likely to find this type of a plan in an infill city where most everything has been built out. So in the next stage down from area-wide land use plan is the community-wide land use design plan. And in this plan, you're looking at much more specific direction from the plan. So it's telling you the type of development that's going to occur, the mix of development, the density of development, so and how that development is going to be organized spatially, both perhaps from a 2-dimensional area and maybe a 3-dimensional, although that likely would happen in the zoning code or a specific plan. You also probably have a map in there to demonstrate how your land use is connecting with your transportation sector. And it's very much end state focused. It's telling you it's taking that vision statement, which is also end state focused, and it's trying to kind of put it pen to paper to show what that would look like in the end. Now, in California, it's most likely that the general plan, the comprehensive general plan, would fall under this community-wide land use design plan. Now, specific plans are take the ideas of the general plan and move it down to a specific plan focus. Now, not every city has a specific plan. Some cities just rely entirely on on a set of zoning codes and a set of design guidelines or design regulations. But nowadays, most cities have a specific plan, sometimes for a downtown area. In Pasadena, they have 7 different specific plan areas, each with different directions for the city. And prior to their most recent update, the general plan actually just said, well, there will be this geographic area where we will develop the densities in the future. And it was kind of a black box, these areas. It didn't provide much direction. It provided a vision for the specific plan. And then the city went and did specific plans to create then the density mix, the development standards, the designs for each of those specific plan areas. In the most recent general plan update, though, the general plan did provide density calculations for each of those specific plan areas. And that's more characteristic, is that the specific plans really provide a set of development standards. They provide design guidelines. They provide even maybe streetscape designs. There's an infrastructure plan. It would have an implementation plan. So you're really getting to the specifics of what you want the development to look like, and very specific about the types of uses you want to have. And then the last type of plan that's in this list is development management plan. It's not very typical in the state of California to have these. It's looking at the short term, what should happen within the 5 to 10 year period. Again, it's looking at location and type, but more specifically the rate of design and perhaps even the quality of design. It's important for cities that are building out, moving from agricultural areas or rural areas to urban areas, to really figure out where new infrastructure is going to go, water lines and sewer lines, and at what pace they're going to be put out there in order to make development occur. Now, just some specifics about California in relation to these plans. It's important to note that some of these general plans that do not create specific uses and densities are no longer allowed by the state. And what I mean is that where sometimes a general plan might leave an area out and say, well, we'll figure out the density of this area through this specific plan. That's not allowed by state law anymore. State law says that when you look at a general plan, you need to be able to determine what is the density of that area and how much development can occur there. It's also important to know that state law says you have to be able to look at a general plan map and tell the allowed intensity of development. All right, so we're moving along pretty speedily. The first section of this presentation or lecture was about what was the purpose of a plan, and then we talked about these different types of plans, those 4 different types. From here, we want to talk about how one would go about evaluating a plan. And this is going to be very important to you students in that at the end of this course, you're going to go through and evaluate some land use elements, housing elements, specific plans, and an element of your choosing. So really pay attention to this part of the presentation. So one of the important criteria for evaluating a plan is, does the plan create a clear picture of the future? And so one of the benefits of creating a clear picture for the future is that it will unite your population together. It will also keep people focused on the plan, and it will allow people to compare these short-term projects. So whether this multifamily building should be built or whether we should make this minor change, they'll compare it to the long-term goals of your plan and say, well, this project brings forward that vision that we created, or it doesn't. One of the plans that I've worked on in the past was in Pasadena. When we started working on the general plan there, the plan that pre-existed had 7 guiding principles, and it was interesting to see how many people in the community knew of some of the 7 guiding principles of the general plan. Through the process, we added an 8th guiding principle that focused on education, but sometimes you would hear planning commissioners or you would hear design commissioners talk about the 7 guiding principles and whether this project move forward one of these guiding principles. So that shows that that general plan at the time was helping to unite the decision-making process for that community. So in terms of that vision statement, a good vision statement is important for a good plan. As part of that vision statement, you want to assess the trends that are out there presently. You want to do kind of a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of the community, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? One of the ways we did that in Pasadena was we just interviewed, we did either focus groups or short kind of one-on-one interviews with people, about 100 people. And we just asked them, what do you like about Pasadena? What could be better about Pasadena? And we took all of those notes and then we looked for trends within that. And then based on that, and then based on additional feedback we got throughout the rest of the process, we were able to establish a vision for the community that truly wasn't far off from some of the guiding principles of the previous plan. But it helped us figure out what were the trends that were out there. So you're going to do that analysis, you're going to do that outreach, and you're going to prepare a vision statement of what the community is looking for. And that vision statement really needs to be in words and not in pictures. Eventually, if you establish a set of pictures that help tell that story, that's good. But often the vision statement is going to include things that cannot be conceptualized visually. So this is a vision statement that we wrote in Temple City with the General Plan Advisory Committee. And notice from it that it's definitely end state driven, meaning that it's not talking about how we get to there, but what is that end state that we want life to look like in the future. In San Gabriel, we did an exercise with the community when we were doing a specific plan where we asked people to write what life would be like for a day living in that specific plan area 30 years from now. And so, you could write a story about what life would be like. This one's a little bit different, but it does say in 2050, this city is still going to have its small town feel. It's still going to be family friendly. It's going to be a place that has clean streets and sidewalks. There's going to be a downtown that's vigorous and prosperous. It's going to be a green community with some aspects of sustainability. It's going to be a place where people can move about using different options. They can do it on by foot or by bike or by transit or even by vehicle. And that people who live there are going to be informed, they're going to be involved, it's going to be engaged. So that's kind of what a vision statement might look like. But each city's vision statements should come out differently. It should reflect the unique aspects of that community. Pasadena's version of its vision statement is different. It's based on 8 guiding principles. And each of those principles can be summed up, but they're all, again, here written in kind of that end state form. The first one's that growth is going to be targeted to serve the community, that growth needs to bring benefits to the community, and it's going to be targeted into the specific plan areas. That Pasadena's historic resources will be preserved, that Pasadena will be economically vital place, that it's going to include the 3 different aspects of sustainability, both social equity, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. That it's going to be a city where people can circulate without cars, that it's going to be a hub both for the region, both culturally, scientifically, and corporately, that it's going to continue to be a place where people participate from a community perspective. And then the last one was the one that was added in its most recent update, and that was about being committed to public education. And so this is how Pasadena chose to express its vision for the future. So the plan needs to include the issues of the day, the vision for the future, and then secondly, it needs to include a set of facts. And so early on in your process, you're going to create a set of facts that that the general plan or whatever plan you're adopting is based on. And so that might be a community trends section. It might be a separate section of the general plan or a separate document. In Pasadena, we created what was called the metrics report, and we took a lot of what we were hearing in terms of trends. People were wondering, well, did the previous general plan work? Did we build out the way we said it was going to? Did we implement the policies and objectives of that plan? So then we put together a set of metrics to determine whether the city had moved forward as it said it had. And so then the goal was to continue to update that metrics report to demonstrate whether the community was moving forward based on the general plan. So a good basis of facts is important to the creation of a good general plan. So you might, the goal is to describe both existing conditions and perhaps future conditions. So that could be from population, what is the present population, both demographically speaking, but in total numbers as well. And then what does the future hold? So what are the estimates or projections that the State Department of Finance is putting out? Economically too, what does the present economy of the city look like? Who are the major employers? How far are people traveling outside the city to do work? And then are there any projections that you can use about how the economy might change in the future? How many land uses are, different types of land uses are out there? How much land is dedicated to them? What's the density? And then what's the supply for additional growth in the future? What community facilities are out there? Where are they? What infrastructure is out there? What issues are there? Is there enough sewer capacity? Or are there improvements that need to be made to the sewer system? Things like that. And then talk about the natural environment. So in your general plan, that might be in a specific element of the general plan, but you need to talk about what the state is of the natural environment. So in Temple City, we took kind of a different tactic. We created what's called the community profile. Originally, that occurred as a separate document, but over time, we put that onto a web page. And then it shows population, and then it shows ethnicity and race. And then we tried to create graphics that were more visually interesting rather than just tables, to kind of create an infographic sort of feel. So besides creating looking at what the issues are presently, and then writing a vision statement, and then putting together a good set of facts, then you go and create the goal and policies, and you want to create that around a good framework. So your goals of a general plan, and this is important, are broad statements about what is the desired future outcome or condition. It's not about how you're going to get there. It's about what is that end state that you're moving towards. Your second step under goals used to be objectives, and objectives have lost some popularity. Some general plans don't include them anymore, and most consultants are just going straight from the goal section down to the policy section. In the policy section, so for each goal, you're going to have more than likely more than one policy for each goal. You're going to have multiple policies per goal. Each goal needs to be supported by at least one policy. And those policies are statements about how you're going to get to that goal. Good policies have some metric tied to them. Doesn't always have to. Like if you have a design, some design goals, you're not going to have metrics in them. But if you can add some numbers to your policies or dates, we're going to do this by this date, that's even better. That's going to be further spelled out in your implementation document and your implementation measures, but it's good to start putting those into your policies. So we talked about issues, the vision statement, the fact-based, the goal and policy framework, and then you could have different plan proposals. So your plan might start, the authors talk about 3 different types of proposals. One is the spatial design. And so that's coming down to what 2-dimensionally and even possibly 3-dimensionally, how do you imagine land uses will work in the future? Where will open space be? How will people get around? What does it look like maybe in terms of height or step backs or setbacks? But you're not going to start including numbers for setbacks unless you're developing a set of specific plans. It would not be in the general plan. You're going to create a land use map that shows where different uses are allowed, or if you're doing that area-wide plan, you're going to designate those 3 different regions. You're going to have some transportation maps that show how people are going to move through that plan area. And then you're going to look at are there different landscape features that make development either suitable or unsuitable. So that's A is your spatial designs. B is your development management programs. And this is your implementation program. In California, we tend to use the word implementation program. So basically, it's going to come down to how you're going to implement the plan, how are you going to achieve these goals. You're going to really focus on actions, and then you're going to prioritize those actions. You're going to, most often it's done in a table format where you show what's going to be done in the first few years, and then what's going to be done in the next few years. You're going to create a different series of time to see what policies are priorities. Your implementation program could focus on things like creating new ordinances, updating other plans, doing your CIP, your capital improvement program, developing new specific plans, and then they need to be based on a certain time schedule. And then lastly, any good policy needs to have good monitoring and evaluation. And this is a requirement of state law as well, that we need to track the implementation and performance of our general plans. So in California, that means that every April 1st, your general plan implementation report needs to be submitted to this Office of Planning and Research. Usually that's reviewed by your planning commission and your city council. And then I think it's required to be reviewed by the planning commission and your city council. And then your housing element also is, that implementation report is due on April 1st to the state Housing and Community Development Department. So just wanted to show you some examples of what this might look like. In Temple City, we created what is called the Crossroads Specific Plan. It was an area that focused on the area south of Las Tunas and west of Rosemead Boulevard. And it's one large block that was assembled in the 1970s through redevelopment. And the goal was to divide the block up into smaller blocks, represented here by both the dark black lines and then the kind of the purple line and the green lines. But in looking at that, we wanted to look at more than just what development might look like in terms of construction and buildings, but also get down into the specifics of, if you looked at a cross section of the street, what would that street look like? And so we looked at other examples of streets that we liked, like 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. And we looked at how upper floors were stepped back. We looked at what are the street improvements that we want to have in there. We wanted to have a center median. We wanted to have a two drive aisles. We wanted to have places, wide sidewalk, 17 feet wide, so that people could either have cafe space there or meet and gather there. And then we wanted to have the parking underground with a floor of retail on the ground floor with residential on the top floors. And that idea that the upper floors were pushed back was a key component of what the community wanted there. So this type of specificity would be found in your specific plan, but you typically would not get to that level of specificity in a general plan. So in talking about what an implementation plan looks like, this is a screenshot of the implementation plan that we put together for the city of Pasadena. In this, we had an implementation plan for each of the elements, and then you can see we have the first item here is general plan maintenance and monitoring. And there was a statement in the document that the city is committed to reviewing its programs and implementing the goals and policies of the general plan through a comprehensive maintenance and monitoring program. And so we have a note there of what the program is. We have a description of what the program is. We have some policies that are connected to the general plan monitoring program. And then it states whether that's going to happen in the near term, and in this way, it was going to happen every single year. It was going to be done periodically, and that each of the departments would be involved in assisting in creating that general plan monitoring program. And then the next program was updating the general plan elements, and that there's a note there that, for instance, we would need to update the housing element. And that there would be a 5-year review of the land use element. And then again, the policies connected to that's happening kind of more in the mid-long-term phase. And then it notes who the responsible parties are, in this case, planning and community development. So all of those were kind of internal plan qualities. Those are the quality of the plan that's based on just what's in there. But there's some qualities of a plan that are not so much based on what's in there, but how people are from the outside are working with the plan. And the first one there is to recognize and encourage opportunities to use the plan. So does the plan encourage its own use? Is it inspirational? Are there pictures in there that are driving people to use it? Does it read like a magazine and people are taking it out and looking at it? Is it inspirational in that it creates, like the guiding principles that I showed you, that it creates a desired outcome that people can hold on to, like the idea that people can move around Pasadena without a car was inspirational in a way. Is it action oriented? I can remember in San Gabriel, there was a policy that was dear to the Planning Commission, and that was we were going to plant 10,000 trees by 2010. That's a very clear action-oriented policy that kind of became inspirational as well. A general plan, in terms of external plan quality, also needs to be flexible. Are there alternate courses of action to achieve a goal? And then it needs to be legally defensible. We need to explain the laws that play a role, and one way of doing that is to put little captions within the plan and explain the laws that are out there that affect that goal or policy. So one way that we tried to make the Temple City General Plan much more likely to be used by the public was to use a technology that ESRI uses called a story map. And so instead of really focusing the general plan on a paper document, which we did end up having to create by state law, really what we push is the story map that's online. And so it's really the general plan is made up of 8 tabs, ranging from the introduction, which includes the community profile and the vision statement, and then 6 different tabs, each representing an element of the general or chapter of the general plan. So land use, mobility, economic development, community services, natural resources, and hazards. And then one clicks on that tab in order to get to the element. And then as one scrolls in the frame to the left, one reads more about that element. So that's the text that you would normally find in an element. And as you scroll through that, the images on the right change. So it's much more interactive. It's much more interesting. It includes a lot more pictures than you would typically have in a paper document. And because the maps are online, you can zoom in on them and you can kind of explore it more than you would be able to online. So making the general plan much more interactive is one of those external qualities. So the last one was, are we recognizing and encouraging opportunities to use the plan? The second one is, are we creating a clear understanding of the plan? Is it relevant? Is it understandable? When people pick it up, can they understand what's being said? If it is, then it's a good quality plan. Does it account for interdependent actions in the plan scope? So it's important to realize here that you really need to coordinate with other agencies. And this will be a requirement of law that you will need to provide copies of the plan, for instance, to anyone providing infrastructure to your community, like your water service providers. And then they will do an analysis of comparing your general plan projections with their urban water master plan to see whether there's sufficient capacity to meet that demand or what additional infrastructure might need to be provided. But coordinating your actions with other agencies will be key to its success. So for instance, in Temple City, we had 5 different water purveyors that were providing water service to the community. So we had to work with each of those agencies to ensure that there was sufficient capacity for water. The fourth external quality is, does your general plan reveal the participation that took place? Who was involved in this process? How did they participate? What effect did the participants have? When people gave input, did things change over time? And in Pasadena, we did what was called a general plan outreach report. So we spent an entire year of the general plan process just reaching out to the community, starting with one-on-one interviews, and then slowly gaining steam, moving forward until we got to the point where we had a citywide community fair that focused on the land use or the general plan update. And then after we had collected all of that input, thousands upon thousands of comments that we had collected, we put together what was called the General Plan Outreach Summary Report. And we put it together in kind of a magazine format. And then so that people would refer to it and use it, we included lots of pictures. And for instance, this diagram here became something that was very familiar to the General Plan Advisory Committee because it showed pretty quickly to them what were the key trends and concerns that the community had. It was open space and parks. It was design and architecture. Where was growth and density going to occur? What was the plan going to be based on, transit or on driving? Traffic was something that you're going to hear no matter what community you're in. And community character is something that's very important to Pasadena. Because of the format that we prepared this in, the General Plan Advisory Committee members, for instance, would bring this to almost every meeting. And it was something that we checked back in on as we moved through that process. So the authors note that when you're looking at a plan, there are some common potential limitations to a plan. And so as you're doing analysis later on in the class of different housing elements and general plan elements, these are things you might want to look at. Is the fact base weak? And this is not something that you typically find in a housing element. The housing consultants and the state housing and community development department will ensure that you are making your decisions based on good facts. And so typically the first whole section of your housing element is a community profile. But do you have a lot of facts in there? Do you understand what's happening in the community? Are there facts leading you to understanding and solving problems that are coming? And are you prioritizing those policy solutions? I can tell you that in Temple City's case, through the housing element, one thing that we consistently told the community is that the community had the sense that it was a very well-off community, that there was not a real strong demand for affordable housing amongst its existing constituents. And what we were able to demonstrate throughout the process, or through this fact community profile, was that there was almost 50% of the population that was in that low to moderate income category. And because of that, there was a deep demand for affordable housing already within the community. And then the more we looked at the demographics, we found that a large portion of the seniors in the community were impacted by the unaffordability of housing. That they might be rich in equity, but they were not rich in terms of having monthly disposable income. And so that became, that then influenced the policies that we adopted to really look at how we could help the seniors in the community. So a weak fact base is going to lead to a weak policy and implementation program. Monitoring often is something that we leave out in terms of planning, but it's important to have a good monitoring piece. How much of something do you want? Do you, when you're writing a policy, how many trees should be planted? When should they be planted by? Who is responsible for planting them? Where should it occur? You don't need to answer all of those questions in every single policy, but within your implementation document, you're going to want to put as much detail as humanly possible. Where should it occur? Who's responsible? When? And how much of it? And then lastly, the document needs to be readable. It needs to be easy to use. It needs to be comprehensible. This is not just a document for the planners. Hopefully this becomes a document that people leave out on their living room tables like a magazine, and that it's something that people can look at quickly and get an understanding for a community. A long list of goals is just going to bore people to death. Jargon is going to make people think this document's not for me. Poor illustrations are going to bore people and think that this document's low quality. But instead, using maybe a magazine format with bubbles that kind of call out and define things for people. In Temple City, we used a story map to try to make it more interactive and user-friendly. So just to review, we talked about the purpose of a plan. We talked about that this plan that the authors are writing about mostly in this chapter are general plans. They're long-range documents that the horizon year is 20 to 30 years out, but they're supposed to be updated every 10 years. That general plan needs to deal with both the political and the legal issues that are in the community. That the goal of that plan is to manage development. Where should development occur? How much should occur? And how should it occur? How quickly should it occur? It's going to set a vision for the community. It's going to be based on a good set of facts. Maybe it's going to result in a community profile document or a good introduction to the general plan. It's going to help people take their short-term decision making and compare it to general plan's long-term goals, and it's going to be relevant to that community. We also talked about those different types of plans. Remember, there was the area-wide plan that mostly shows where the conservation area will be, what areas will remain rural, and what areas will remain urban, or which areas might become urban. The second one was that community-wide plan, where we really said that in California, that would be called the general plan. And that's where you start getting to what is the specific mix of land uses that will occur, what's the density of those land uses, or how much of it is there, and what are the different types of land uses. And then remember that those are end state focused. What is the end goal that we're trying to achieve, not so much how are we going to get there. That occurs in the policies and in the implementation document. The third type was the specific plan, and that's where it's almost more like it's kind of like a specific plan's a conglomeration of like a set of development standards from your zoning code along with design guidelines, things like that. So the specific plan is going to have development standards, how tall, what are the setbacks, how much of it in terms of floor area ratio or lot coverage. It's going to have design guidelines in it. It might have a streetscape design, and it's going to address any infrastructure that needs to be provided. And then the last one was the development management plan. Not typical to many of the cities in the Southern California region. It's more short-term focused. It really focuses on the rate of development and where infrastructure should be built. And then lastly, in terms of our review, we talked about the criteria for evaluating plans, that there's internal criteria, which are the vision. How good is the vision statement? Is it addressing the trends and issues that are out there today? Is it based on a good series of facts? How is that goal and policy framework? Is it interconnected? Is it consistent? Does it demonstrate the tensions in the community? And how about those different plans that it proposed, the spatial plans, the implementation program, and monitoring? And then there's the external categories. Those are, does it recognize and encourage opportunities to use the plan? So does it encourage people to pick up the plan and use it or view it? Does it create very clear future end state understanding of what the goals of the plan is? Does it account for interdependent actions in plan scope, meaning does it connect with things that are happening in the region or with your utilities? And does it reveal participation? Does it talk about who created the plan, who participated, and how did their participation change? So with that, that's chapter 3, and I look forward to seeing you all later.